So Intel has actually been known as one of the safest blue chip stocks in the entire stock market. And well, I can see why value investors may see this at first glance. Their free cash flow generation has been very strong the last decade, steadily growing over time, and the most recent print as of 2020 was over $20 billion in free cash flow. The bulls absolutely drool over this. Now, when we look at this and we combine it with their PE of 10, you have what appears to be a no-brainer investment in a blue chip tech company. And here's the thing, we don't have any crystal balls at our disposal, so maybe over time Intel ends up being a great investment, but we have to consider the factors here today and kind of step outside our box of just numbers and, fundamental analysis or even technical analysis and kind of think from a perspective of business. Is this really a good company to invest in? What I really want to understand is, why is the market pricing the stock so cheap here today? And I think I have an answer to this. I'm going to share the information that I found with you guys in this video. So if you appreciate the research, you find any insight in this video, hit the like button, share this with a friend, and subscribe to join our community. Okay, so when we invest in a company, we want to make sure that company is providing something valuable to society, whether that's selling to businesses, or products or services, selling to consumers. You just want to make sure that what they do is something that people want. And one way you can judge this is, of course, by their revenues and how much that's growing year over year. Looking here at Intel's revenue, we can see it has growth overall over the last decade, but it has had extended periods of time where it's kind of stagnated. Sometimes this lasts just a few years, sometimes a little shorter than that, sometimes a little longer than that, but it has broken out time and time again and goes higher. Now, over this last couple of years, this stagnation is causing a bit more concern because this time, for the first time really in a long time, their competition, AMD, has been absolutely firing on all cylinders. During the same time period of Intel stagnation, AMD has been growing the fastest it has grown in decades, and they have absolutely no signs of slowing down. So I know the argument's going to be, well, it's happened before where they've stagnated and they broke out and they moved higher, but all those times AMD has kind of just been one of those businesses that's been flat. Intel's maintained its market share, their moat. They've really positioned themselves really well over the last few decades. But now times are changing, and clearly we're seeing from AMD's numbers, their business is booming. So now thinking kind of outside of just the numbers here, we see that AMD and Intel are competing head to head here. One company is struggling to grow, the other company is absolutely firing on all cylinders. And that kind of throws out the argument of, maybe the market itself isn't growing, because clearly there is still a ton of demand out there for semiconductors. And right now, instead of going to Intel, that business is going to pretty much AMD. In other words, guys, AMD is stealing away market share from Intel. And of course, this is concerning because if you're number one in the space and you've maintained a strong market share for a very long time, and now that's finally being threatened by a competitor, yeah, you should pay attention to that as an investor. And you should think to yourself, is this competitor positioned to potentially overtake the number one player over time? This graph here summarizes things and really drives home this point. For CPUs worldwide, Intel had over 80% market share just a few years ago, but that has since dropped now to about 60% market share thanks to AMD's execution. So naturally, guys, this is a cause for concern, and this shouldn't just be brushed off as, meh, this happened before, the revenue kind of slowed down, but then they'll get back to it. And maybe they will, but we have to consider the fact this time that the competitors are doing much better than they did before, and things could change this time around. So now this is the first concern that you should take into account when you're making an investment decision on Intel. But there's another big concern as well out there, which kind of first started up about a year, maybe 2 years ago. Intel does a good job of getting its chips in a ton of laptops, Microsoft laptops, Windows laptops, Apple laptops. But that changed recently, and Apple was kind of the first company here to say, we're just gonna do it ourselves. Apple released their M1 chips, and most recently they announced the M1 Pro and M1 Max, which are incredibly powerful chips, guys, that perform much better than Intel's chips. And at first, you may think this wasn't a big deal. I thought, hey, this is probably not a big deal, but there actually is a whole lot of side effects from this, which we are starting to see now. First off, consumers are not interested anymore. When they're looking at MacBooks, they do not want to see an Intel logo on there. They want to see an M1 chip in there. And that's a deciding factor for a lot of people. Just kind of go online, kind of get a rough idea of what people are thinking, and you'll see that a lot of sentiment is pretty much ignore the ones with Intel chips, buy the ones with M1 chips. That's the first shift in consumer thinking, and I think that's going to be pretty big. Now, there's also another massive change that's happening because Microsoft, the other big player in the CPU space for their laptops and such, is looking to move away as well. Just today we got news that Microsoft hired a key Apple engineer to work on their own chips, and Microsoft wants to build these chips for their servers first and foremost for Azure. However, they also have consumer products like their Surface and other laptops, and they recently partnered with AMD to create a chip for their laptops, guys. It's another move that hurts Intel directly. So again, while Apple's move last year, whatever it was that they announced the M1, felt sort of insignificant, we're now seeing other large tech giants do the same. I wouldn't be surprised if Amazon did the exact same thing for AWS. Wouldn't be surprised if Google did the same thing with GCP. Alibaba, I believe, is also rumored to create their own chips. I would not be surprised if these large tech companies just do it themselves going forward, build it on ARM architecture, which hopefully NVIDIA will acquire at some point. They're still waiting for that deal to close. And that just eats away at Intel's moat and their competitive advantage. And these are external factors because Intel just hasn't performed the way that these companies are expecting it to. Their chips are just not good enough. And a big reason was because Intel has been delaying their 7nm chips for far too long, and I guess customers just got to the point where they're like, we're just gonna do it ourselves, we're gonna do it better than you guys. On top of this, Intel also planned to have a factory built, but they're delaying that decision as well. So again, it seems like delays goes hand in hand here with Intel. So you have this company that's generating a ton of cash flow, a whole lot of profits, but that cash is just kind of sitting there, not doing a whole lot. They're buying back shares, paying dividends. But in terms of innovation, they're falling further and further behind while their competition gets further and further ahead. Now, of course, Intel can turn things around. Their new CEO can kind of turn this ship around and say, hey, we're number one once again and we're going to dominate. But as of right now, I don't see a whole lot changing and things still don't look all that great. It's quite clear to me that the market recognizes all of this, guys, which is why Intel is having a hard time seeing its stock break out there, essentially remaining flat since 2018. And you think about it, that's 4 years of virtually no returns while the market has roared higher. So with investing, you just gotta think sometimes outside of just the pure numbers, the PE, the valuation, right? Those numbers can look good, but if the business and the outlook for the business does not look great, it's going to be a poor investment. And shareholders of IBM can probably speak to that. I have fallen for this trap before. I invested in IBM a few years ago. They changed their CEO, they got Red Hat, there was a whole lot of excitement, and then after holding it for a little while, I realized this company is just doing the exact same thing. Nothing is changing. So I ended up selling out of that position. And you know what? It taught me a valuable lesson to look outside the box. Don't just look at metrics like PE and make a decision only on that. A lot of times a company is cheap on its PE basis for a good reason. The market realizes things a lot of times that you and I may not realize at first glance, but eventually it starts to become clear. And what I think is happening right now is the market realizes AMD is getting ahead, Intel is falling further behind, and it's pricing these stocks accordingly. Now next year, Intel is expected to shrink yet again. It's continued pressure from their competitors. Doesn't seem like they're going to be able to turn things around just yet. AMD, on the other hand, expect to see strong continued growth, near 20% next year. So it's, most definitely not a semiconductor issue that we're seeing, not a sector issue here. And you know what? NVIDIA, let's throw this in here into the mix as well. Near 20% growth expected next year. So again, confirming this is not a sector issue. This is a company-specific issue that Intel is facing. So to me, guys, Intel as an investment makes little to no sense right now. I know a lot of you invested in Intel, and I wish you all the best in it. But to me, it just doesn't feel like it's the right place to put my capital when I'm looking at semiconductor tech exposure. You know, if you're someone that's excited about chips, graphics cards, that kind of stuff, AMD and NVDA, they're incredible companies. If you're someone that's excited about, you know, development, like kind of the foundry process of semiconductors, Taiwan Semiconductor is a great company. And there's a whole bunch of other companies involved in the semiconductor process that also show a ton of value, like, you know, Applied Materials or Texas Instruments or Micron. There's so many companies in this space that you can actually have a good stake in. They're good businesses, better than Intel in my opinion, and really have a number one player to kind of ride the wave in the future with. To me, it's kind of clear that Intel's losing its moat, it's shrinking. Their innovation has fallen behind. Delays are synonymous with the company now. And there's just a whole lot of negative sentiment, rightly so, on the stock, which is why the stock is really going nowhere for the last few years. So personally, I don't want my money sitting in a business like this where, you know, it looks cheap, but it's cheap for a reason, and I think I understand why it's so cheap. Also think of it this way, right? Intel's been kind of a fairly cheap PE for a little while now. The market sees this and recognizes it. It's not like it's like a week or a couple of weeks that it's cheap PE and you may miss that dip. It's been 4 years that we've seen a fairly low PE on Intel, and there's still no interest in the market to buy this and kind of bid this back up. So personally, I will wait on the sidelines. Intel is still a company I may own in the future, but as of right now, until management shows that they can actually turn things around, they stop delaying their products and their future chips, and they actually show that they can innovate and kind of be number one again in terms of performance and just, you know, in the industry, just showing that they're dominant there. I'm not interested, and I feel that this is possibly one of the biggest value traps of this decade. So guys, just think long and hard. You know, you're a value investor, that's great. Think outside the box, see if this is an investment you want to put your money into, and let me know in the comments down below what you decide on, because I'd love to hear your thoughts, as always, down below. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to invest positively, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.